since the last time we met with you. We met with our school and district leaders. We had our Summer Leadership Institute, and we shared this plan with all of our school and district leaders. We also did activities with them to help them build connections to the 5 priority areas and how it fits with things that they're asked to do in their schools. So that was exciting to see how they made all of those connections. We also took feedback from each of them, as well as the feedback from you last month, and have made revisions accordingly. The other piece that we have done is we've worked with one of our teachers, Miss Wendy Pillars, who some of you know. She's a Jordan Matthews teacher. She's also a published author, and she's done 2 books on sketchnoting. And we've worked with her to commission a sketch, if you will, of our strategic plan. And so we're in the final phases of getting that. You may remember she did one for us in our last strategic plan. It kind of had the kind of cool, it looked like almost like a student drew it. But it's a nice visual of the entire plan kind of on one sheet, and it makes a nice elevator document that we can share with people when we're out in the public.
She's also one of our parents. I think she's got her son's maybe a
Yeah.
junior or senior this year, Jordan Matthews.
Yeah, so it's nice to be able to use some of our talent that we have here in the district to contribute to our plan. So we're in the final stages of that. And then Ms. Weichel has been busy with her team, and she'll give you the update on what they've been working on.
So we finalized, we hope, the document that we will be posting to the website and updating throughout. We're very excited about the start of school because that's going to give us a great opportunity to shoot some new photos and kick off the true start of our strategic plan. We also are going to unveil at Convocation the video that will be the bookend to the video we had this spring, launching the idea of the strategic plan and where we were. This one is going to be more nuts and bolts. Okay, let's get down to work. We have our plan. This is where we're going. And also at Convocation, tied into that, we are, as a sneak peek, planning to roll out our Instagram account and tie it into the One Chatham so that we can have a little synergy and excitement around that.
That's all we have this evening, but we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about the plan. We know you've seen it before, but those are kind of the updates that we had for you since we last met.
I move that the Chatham County Board of Education approve One Chatham as the district's new strategic plan.
Second.
Got a motion, a second, any discussion? All in favor with an eye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for your engagement in the process. We do appreciate all the feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the input you sought.
Very much. Just to back up before you get started, the certified subs, 155, and non-certified is 120. So that's quite an improvement over, what was it, like 104 and down. I mean, you know, back in December, that's quite an improvement there. So yeah, thank you for that. All right, item B, consolidated federal grants for 2022, 2023. Dr. Moran and Ms. Little.
So you may recall each year about this time, we submit to you the consolidated grant application for all of our federal grants. And our executive director for federal programs and school improvement, Ms. Carrie Little, will tell you a little bit more about this process and kind of what this entails. But I did want to take just a moment to brag on Ms. Little just a little bit. I think I've said this before, but she is recognized at the state level for her work in federal programs. She's kind of a go-to person for her attention to detail and the years of experience that she brings. She works on needs assessments. She works with principals planning out their budgets and helping them come up with creative ways to maximize dollars for students. She has countless meetings that she attends at the state and federal level. She works with our finance team quite a bit. And one of the things that has been added to her plate that doesn't really talk about it tonight, but I think it's important to mention, she's really been a heavy part of all of the ESSER grants and funding, and has had to work extremely close with our finance team on that. And it's been a lot. Many districts hired additional people to do that work. So I just wanted to take a second just to thank her for all of the additional work that she's had to do on top of her normal federal grants, and just what a great job she does. And I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So this is, every year our annual consolidated grants. And you have two separate, you have a PowerPoint, but you also kind of have the one pager that's about 3 pages that has a little bit more information in length. You will see on your first slide, second slide really, what the consolidated grant actually entails. So you have Title I Part A, that's what most people hear of when they hear of the Title I schools. That's how to improve academic achievement of the disadvantaged student. Title I Part C, it's a part of that, is just strictly for the migrant education program. Title II is teacher and principal training and recruitment. I work closely with HR in helping submit that plan and their budget. Title III is language acquisition. So you also hear that as ESL, which in the future you'll be hearing as ML, as multilingual learners. So in case you hear both of those, that's what we're talking about. Title III is also language acquisition. And what they mean by significant increase is they give us a little more money for those children who are immigrant children. So those are children who are here in the United States for their first 3 years. So not district to district, strictly just came to the US for the first time. And then Title IV is student support and academic enrichment. So for a total of approximately $2.2 million, that's what those are the title programs within there. So what we have done is we have used feedback surveys from the schools, from the community, from district leaders, from parents, whatever feedback that has come through the district, just as you have this past year gone through the listening tours with Dr. Jackson, the One Chatham event, that feedback, the feedback from the school improvement teams that have parent representatives on there. So we try to gather all of that to make sure what we're doing is meeting the needs of what all of our stakeholders believe we should do. So in the next slide, you can change that. In Title I Part A, so we do that for all of them together, and then we kind of look at each one of our title grants to determine what's going to happen with those. So Title I Part A, there is a set aside at the district level that cannot be more than 12%, but that helps with salaries. It also helps with our set aside for pre-K and homeless. So that's what those funds go to. But the majority of the money from Title I will go to the schools. We allot that back to the schools. So you will see the percentages you see next to each school are the free and reduced percentages. So that's the percent of students who receive free and reduced lunch. I will tell you that we do not count pre-K in these. The reason we do not count pre-K is because we already do a set aside for pre-K within the district. And so we give a per pupil allotment, which the long sheet explained to you what we did. And that's the amount that each school received. A portion of that, schools are required to do family engagement. So it's just a small portion, but that's included in those amounts. If you can go to the next slide, thank you. So basically some of the things, looking at all the plans that schools have submitted, they actually have these in their budgets, but they also have it in their NC STAR school improvement plan, which you will see coming soon. Most of them you will see have class size reduction positions. So that means they hire a teacher to make their class sizes smaller. They have interventionists, curriculum coaches, tutors. Some of our schools have interpreter receptionists so that they can engage with the families of second language a little bit better. We do have a school that has a family engagement liaison, which has been very helpful in reaching their community, as well as instructional assistants. Some of the resources, yes.
And can you describe a little, just briefly, what an interventionist might do?
So some of them have actually put math interventionists in place because their math scores they saw were not where they wanted them to be. So they've hired a person to strictly, when they have their MTSS and they break off into their intervention groups, those math interventionists will specifically work with those students. And those are flexible groupings based on the data that they see over the time that they serve them. Some of the resources that they're going to be using it for are additional AVID materials and AVID trainings, library books, STEM equipment, other software. We do have a school that has started to look at some type of incentive bonus because it's been hard to hire folks. So they're going to look at their EVOS scores over the year and even staff attendance over the year, as well as some curriculum writing stipends. So that's Title I Part A. Do you have any questions about that? That's kind of in general what those schools are spending their funds on. Next, we have Title I Part C. Yes.
Back on the free and reduced, and I know this you work with the numbers, but you'll turn and look at Tony or something. A few of those, some of those numbers kind of surprised me that some are higher and some are lower than in the past. Is that, I don't want to point out any particular schools, but some, I'm surprised.
Yeah, no, don't be surprised. It has been changing over time. Our northeastern end, really Pittsburgh up towards the northeast, has really changed. The people moving in have different economic backgrounds. And so those are becoming lower. Actually, Horton, you will notice, is not on that list. They were on the list last year. And that's because they don't have the same number of children meeting the free and reduced criteria. So a lot of those schools on northeastern end and Pittsburgh end, they don't meet the criteria. We as a district serve 40% or above at K-8. And so we're required to serve any school at 75% and above. And so that definitely would, our Siler City K-8s definitely fit that category. But you will also notice that Bonley and JS Waters, their numbers are growing. And I think a lot of people didn't realize they're a little bit more rural, but there is rural poverty and it is increasing out in those areas. That's a great observation.
Now that you're bringing up individual schools,
That's okay.
I may be wrong, but it seems like just a few years ago, Siler City was like 96%, 98%.
Right. So remember, these are based on this past year's data. So what happens when I pull the data, I pull 3 to 4 months in the spring because I want to choose the highest I can choose. We did have a choice this year to go back to 1920 data or 2021 or 21-22.
1920. No, I'm just, I understand.
The reason we
Okay, I
did-
got you.
I know. So if we would have gone back to that data, that data is really skewed based on what is really happening, especially with our growth. And I went through lots of different calculations and I shared it and I said, okay, if we go with this one, Horton will still be in it. It's from 1920 data, but you'll notice that the schools get a lot less and they'll get significantly less than they had. If we move to our most current data, which is not right in the 90th percentile, but it's getting closer, we're still going to be serving those kids that are in more need at those schools. So the decision was made to go with this data. COVID really did impact us. The fact that all meals were free for everyone made a huge impact. So people didn't really want to fill it out, which I don't blame them. They had free lunch and free breakfast. And so this coming year, that all changes.
Right.
So we'll be kind of hitting the pavement pretty hard to try to get folks to fill it out. But that's a great observation. But yes, they are still pretty high. VCE has been our highest for the past several years. It's kind of a hold harmless year. And Mr. Robinson's been so kind in reminding me of his hold harmless year. So great questions and great observations. Thank you. So Title I, Part C, migrant education, literally serves just our migrant students. It is specifically targeted. So we support our migrant recruiter through that. We actually, one out of many, most of the counties in our state, we actually do have contracts with outside healthcare agencies because so many of our kids come in with no insurance and don't have any way of getting their children help. And so we are able to work with Piedmont Health and UNC Dental to get these services for our children. So we do have contracts with those outside healthcare providers, and also professional development for the families and the students. Mr. Hernandez just came back from a day trip or 2-day trip with some high schoolers out in Fayetteville, and they had a wonderful time. So we're able to provide some of those things that they wouldn't normally be able to attend.
Quick question about our migrant students. Years ago, I taught migrant farmers and some of them were just in one area for half the year. And so I imagine we have some students who move during the year to go with their families. And do you count them when they enroll or count them, if they conclude? I'm just kind of curious. How
Well,
that
so
count
they
works.
count, so the state gives us money based on our last count, like in the spring.
In the spring. So
Yeah,
right,
Yeah,
like
and
that.
so, but we do have a national M6 program where our recruiters are supposed to put those children in so that if they're moving from Florida or some other state coming to our state, we can hopefully look them up so we know kind of what's been happening with them. So that's been a nice resource for us as well. Anything else? Okay, Title II, this is teacher and principal training and recruitment. So we're continuing kind of the support that we've been doing for the past couple of years with Title II. We have curriculum coaches salaries in here because we do believe in the train the trainer model. So they are helping our teachers within the schools. We do have contracts with outside agencies to help with beginning teacher and international teacher professional development, as well as funds set aside for workshops, stipends, to help folks with their national boards. So now with a new person in charge, that may be changing throughout the year for next year, but this is kind of, we're continuing what we've done in the past. Title III is language acquisition for our English learners, and you will now hear it as multilingual learners. So we're going back and forth right now. So because people don't know the ML, but the DPI and the state is going to be moving to that ML abbreviation. So I just want to make sure that you know that. So we do support our instructional program facilitator and our data manager and tutors through these funds, as well as our PD for our regular ed teachers and ESL teachers. And other software that we're looking for. What we noticed in our access scores was the writing domain was not very strong. So we're looking for resources to help our teachers, help our students in that domain, as well as providing reading materials for our immigrant students, as they don't have enough of those materials. So we purchase those for them as well. And the other is just continuing our work with the multilingual families so that they have a voice within our district. Okay. And then Title IV is the student support and academic enrichment. We do support the lead social worker, just a part of the salary, to continue to kind of bring the social workers together. We had an influx of social workers, and there's a need to have them kind of all under one roof or one person. This person also is our McKinney-Vento liaison as well. So it just kind of brings a more cohesive group together. So that's been a wonderful help for the district. Services, we also, this is something new this year, something that we saw that we needed, is we wanted to explore year-round options for some of our Siler City schools. And so we have contracted out with RTI International to help us do that, as well as we have mental health contracts and behavior support contracts that help us. The mental health contracts help us with students who do not have any insurance. So we're able to provide those services for them. Professional development, we have digital teaching and learning, and we will also be providing link crew training for high school staff, and that helps with our transitions from middle to high school, as well as providing math intervention curriculum for middle and high school. That is the summary basically of our grants. What I do want you to remember is that all of these federal grants are supplemental. So we have to prove to the state that we as a district allot certain amounts of teachers to each school, resources to each school, and this should always be supplemental to all these programs. And we do, I feel like we do a stellar job at making sure that these are extras so that they can support their children. Any questions?
Anybody?
One question I have, just because people ask me this question, so in case anybody listening has this question, it's sometimes challenging to get feedback from multilingual families because of language discrepancies, and sometimes currently anyway, there are people working different hours, and so what efforts were made to get that to incorporate the multiple opportunities to bring in people for feedback?
Well, that's a great question. So you may or may not remember, through one of our ESSER grants, we were able to help support a new position in terms of an interpreter translator now that works with Ms. Weichel. In addition, the hiring that I submit to you in my department, more than half of the folks that work with me are multilingual. And so what we've had to do individually is literally call them the best we can. We can send letters, and we have schools that send home things, and they're always translated to Spanish. We do work with a contracted agency to do other languages as needed in Chapel Hill. So we'll send home, make sure that they have that information in their language. But we do our best to make sure that everything is translated into Spanish, but even the surveys. So our staff works overtime sometimes to make sure that that happens.
And
But those are,
calling.
we're not perfect by any stretch, but we continue to. But I think even so, we have not been as strong as our parent advisory group in our EL world. And so that's our big focus for this year.
That's good to hear. Thank you so much.
I move the Chatham County Board of Education approve the 2022-2023 consolidated grant application for federal grants as presented.
Second.
Have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor with an aye, please. Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Very much. Item C, revisions to the code of conduct. Ms. Fowler. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. We bring to you tonight revisions to the Student Code of Conduct. Historically, the Code of Conduct has lived within the Student Rights and Responsibilities book. These moving forward will be two separate documents. One will be a student handbook, which will specifically look at for lots of things, athletics, lots of information that students would need kind of going back to school, a lot of information around legislative pieces. And then moving forward, this Student Code of Conduct will be themed the Code of Civility. There are two policy revisions related to that. Policy 4300 simply goes through and makes the changes there so that the Code of Conduct is now considered the Code of Civility. And also there's some additions in Section D of 4300 that spell out the minor violations and serious violations. There's some specifics there. And 4303, which is formerly the Code of Conduct, will now become the Code of Civility. This is where the Code of Conduct has lived. Once this is approved, that will live in that space as well. So the major piece tonight is looking at the actual Code of Civility. Different things that we looked at in conjunction with the school administrators, principals in particular, we worked through those things, and then also in collaboration with Barrington Smith. So the main parts of this, what we realized is that we had pretty wide ranges of consequences. Some of them read warning to even 10 days out of school. So in order to make sure that we were being consistent through the schools, we have now a chart that lives in each area, which is the level of consequence, and it gives a more specific consequence. The level 1, which is your more of a minor kind of violation, there's bigger areas for principals to kind of look through to have some guidance there. I do want to mention that principals are always the deciding factor in discipline. And these are just a guide so that we can make sure that we're having something consistent throughout the district.
And this was created with the principals.
It was.
And all that.
It was.
Everything. So they had lots of input.
Lots of
Thank you.
input. They sure did. They definitely were very excited to see those ranges pulled down so that they have some more specific guidance. So we spent a lot of time looking over and trying to make sure that we were really consistent with those things. The other things, you see some areas that are highlighted in yellow. Those are some strike throughs. We had some conversation around dress code. Always trying to move back. We did some work on this several years ago, moving so that we're, making sure that we are not kind of having administrators be able to out here to kind of determine certain types of dress, but just that we want to make sure that all the appropriate things are covered. And so some of those languages are there. If you want to turn the page. And then one of the big areas, this kind of came about through some conversation. Our cell phone policy has been in place for quite a while. It used some language around pagers and two-way radios and such. So that's definitely not something that we see anymore. I had a conversation earlier in the year that with a parent that their child had gotten home at the end of the day and she couldn't get in touch with her. So, because, you know, when we had this policy, when it went into place, what we did have is landlines at homes. And so a lot of times now, this might be the only way that a parent can get in touch with a student. So we want to make sure that we are keeping kids safe. So this was some of the conversation around that. If a cell phone's taken away, to give this back to a student, the parent's notified. If it's a continued problem, then we would have the parent come to the school. Just trying to kind of work through so that we're making sure that safety is the number one thing. Most everything else has stayed very much consistent. If you go back and kind of look, those are just some charts there for the administrators to look through. We did add the language in particular to the violation of the discrimination harassment policy that we talked about in the spring. One of the big things, this was a conversation that we had with high school principals around vaping. There was a lot of concern because vaping products also have evolved. So a lot of times what's in there is not a nicotine product. So vaping had lived under our tobacco policy. And they really were wanting us to have something that we could look at and be able to handle this. One of the things that we're going to do is a really concerted effort to push out information to parents and to students. Because what you now have is you have kids that may not know what might be in a vape cartridge. So we want to have some conversation around accidental poisoning, because if you don't know what something is and you ingest that, that could be a concern. So we're going to have a parent night. There's going to be a lot of communication back out about these real dangers. This is something that continues to be more and more of a concern. So if it is something that we know is a tobacco type product, it will live under that tobacco policy. It will be looked at in that place. If it is something that a student would be using kind of to achieve this euphoric sense, it will now live with the drug and alcohol policy. And some of that it's going to require us kind of working through. And if we don't know what something is, what we do know is that it could be dangerous. So that's the biggest kind of space there. So those are the major things that we have here. Anybody have any questions?
I do have a question about minor violations. There's a list A through N of possible responses to minor violations. And just to make sure I understand, because there's a D, E, and F that may cover this, but it says instruction, so I'm not entirely sure. So, and I see instruction and conflict resolution and anger management, peer mediation, individual group sessions with the school counselor. But in one of those situations where you had conflicts between two students, in that kind of mediated discussion, would that type of scenario fall under one of these letters?
It would. And I think that some of this was taken from like a former kind of document that we may have had in place. And definitely what we want to do is kind of back to that restorative lens, having conversations. We want kids with their situations that arise and there's a conflict, whether there's a consequence or not, we've got to come to some resolution. So some of that might be through some peer mediation. Some of it may be a mediation with a teacher or a school counselor or an administrator. Our administrators are skilled in that as well.
So it's under this umbrella of all these facets. And another question I had about the minor violations. I know that, suspension is one of the options, and there has been talk of, especially when we look at implicit situations that we're all trying to be more aware of and grow and get training around. If in this policy anywhere it's encouraged to consider the other options, even though they might be more time consuming, might be more fruitful towards behavioral changes and prevent people from missing school if at all possible, because we want kids to continue getting education and also the risk of that implicit piece. So can you speak to that a little
Yeah,
bit?
absolutely. So, our code of conduct, code of civility, it really speaks to something that has now become a bigger issue than what you would normally see like in a classroom. I think a lot of what you're talking about may be some classroom situations, and absolutely that we want to work with students and educate students and make sure that they're aware how they should be interacting with each other, particularly coming back this past year from, we're out of school for a period of time. So just kind of readjusting to that. So we definitely have those conversations about what can be done, how can we work this, and it's a bigger umbrella and picture that we want to make sure that we're working with kids in that area.
Mhm.
Does
So
that answer you?
so for minor offenses, we're not talking about the serious violations,
Right.
but for the minor offenses like that might be a last resort suspension. That's,
A minor violation would be like, a lot of times I'm thinking of like a classroom situation that a teacher is kind of working through with a student, and they do all of these things. Teachers, I mean, what they want to do is they want kids in class. And, one of our strategic plan goals is to look at a reduction of like this number of students who are suspended. What we find when we look at our data is that actually it's a small number of students in the district that are kind of this repeat offender. So all of these things are just to make sure that we're putting supports in place for kids.
Great.
Now, at the end of the day, when we put those supports in there, what we want to know is that we do have this other code that we have to deal, because we want to have to make sure that our schools are safe as well.
great. Thank you so much.
Tracy, in 4303,
Mhm.
okay, we had levels based on age and different things like that, levels of discipline.
We did, and it still has that. It's in the charts that are above. So where we had it under each section, so each violation that had it listed K5, well, actually, I think it did K5 and then 612. So what we actually have now is a chart that goes ahead of each of the levels with a description. And that's what they use to kind of, when they go through the different violations. And there is now K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. Because a lot of the conversation was a middle schooler is different than a high schooler, is different as an elementary student. So,
You mentioned cell phone teachers are still able to, for example, a high school teacher, they come in for a period, they collect in a pocket or whatever, and then go back out. So they still have that option.
yeah, oh yeah, I mean, the act, what is allowed did not change. It was just
Okay.
a matter of making sure that, we're talking about $1,000 device that we want to make sure, particularly if it's the only phone
Sure.
that may be at the house. So.
I got you.
One thing I'd like to iterate here is the old principle here that restorative practices and things, it has its place, but also discipline is not only, and I've had this conversation with parents over and over and over, discipline's not just for your child's situation. The discipline is for the school. Now, that didn't mean I went up and down the hall and said, Johnny got 3 days, and no, I didn't do that. The kids took care of that for me. So, but my analogy that I always use with parents was that when you're driving down the highway and you crest that hill and you see this black and silver on the other side, I will almost guarantee you, whether you're on cruise or not, your eyes will look at your speedometer, or you'll take your foot off the gas. And especially if you see the blue light blinking. So that discipline is not just for that person that was speeding, but it's sending a message to everybody else that, hey, you need to follow the speed limit. So, we don't need to discount the fact of what an act of discipline from the principal or teacher, how far reaching that can be to the rest of the class or the rest of the school. And the other thing, and this is just a point of personal confession, I guess, and Dr. Jackson and I talked, and when I first opened this thing up on Friday night or whenever, Thursday, and I saw a code of civility. Tracy, you were principal. I went, what? What happened to the word conduct? Are we afraid to use that anymore? And Dr. Jackson's so eloquent. He kind of pulled me back down to earth and said, well, it's really meaning the same thing, and I understand, but and I think if you haven't, read his remarked on his first page. Our society has lost civility, and very much so. And so I see where it's coming from, and maybe we can get a more proactive approach on this is how let's treat each other this way. And not because there's a rule that you're going to break, but just because we need to treat each other in a better manner. And we need to get that implanted in our kids' minds because they see so much of what's going on in our society, and it hurts. It really hurts. So we've already made a motion, haven't we?
Nope.
Okay, let's vote.
Are you making a motion?
I thought you made.
No.
Oh.
no, we haven't.
I make a motion that we accept the presentation and manual and guidelines as presented.
Second.
You got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Item D, contracted transportation, Mr. Blythe.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, superintendent. This first attachment, and yeah, go ahead and open the first one back. So this, I think, kind of gives you a perspective on this. So this, we sent out a request for proposals to all these organizations, and we had 4 responses, and you can see what we got back. We asked for this on cents per mile. Because that's what we pay for. And we pay for what we actually drive. And you have to do it based on that because, this student may live here, the student may live way over there. We talk about McKinney-Vento, we may actually have to go into another county. It's never ending. So the cents per mile is really the only way to do it. Note that T&L with the 87 and the 84 cents per mile was by far the lowest proposal and have done this work for us for several years. All right, if you will, the next attachment. So the contract is a 3-year contract. The last time we brought this to you, and actually no, it'd be the other attachment. The total contract was, I believe for 3 years, it was like about a $1.2 million contract. This year it's 1.3. Part of that is, and what we did when we came up with the not to exceed dollar amount is we went back to last year and we looked at the total dollar amount that we paid T&L for this work. And it's on the bottom of the second page is where I'm going to ask you to stop right there. So we took that dollar amount and we added 5% to it. And then we added 5% more for year 2, and we added 5% more for year 3. And we came up with a not to exceed dollar amount. I'm hoping that we won't use all that, but I'll make a point. This part of our population is growing, and as the district grows, this will also. We believe that that will get us to the end of the 3 years and have a cushion to be determined. But that was an educated number. We didn't just pull that out of midair and just say, oh, that number sounds good. So we tried to actually look back and do some projecting.
And so when the bottom drops out and we go to $7 and $8 a gallon, do they have a chance to come back and say, help me?
They can.
Okay.
And we would listen.
Because I would think that would kind of, hit the tail end of this school year, but that's kind of, gas doubled and went beyond double, and they were basing it on prices. And so, yeah, I understand technically we can probably make a hard and fast rule, just like they can say, well, we're parking our cars.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, and I'll say this. P&L has done a good job for us at a fair price. When we talk to our colleagues from other districts across the state, they're paying those other kinds of numbers. And we are very appreciative of that.
Just
Good.
out of curiosity, do ORAD numbers go into these just thoughts at all?
Yes and no. We the next 3 years, we're going to increase, but we believe that the 5% will take care of that. It's an educated guess at this point. If we realize and see that the benefit of doing a 3-year contract is if along the way we realize that it's going to be more, it gives us an opportunity to come back to you later on and say, okay, we're going to need to increase this. But we can look ahead.
I move that the Board of Education approve the contract for contracted transportation be approved.
Second.
Now, motion second, one question.
Yes, sir.
87, 84, are they based, is that the reason for the difference in two? Are
It
they
is.
based in this area?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is.
That's what I was wondering, but I didn't know, just had that
Yes,
question.
sir. It's where they drive from. And we had started that practice years ago. At one point, we actually had 2 different groups.
Yeah.
One group on one side and one group on the other. So we've kept that in place just because the county is pretty large.
Oh, okay. So we've got a motion and a second. Any other questions? All in favor with an eye?
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign? Thank you, Mr. Bison. Just stay still, I think.
Yes, sir.
Contract for janitorial services with the Bud Group.
So as we were preparing this, I learned a phrase that Mr. Messer and Dr. Jackson taught me. It's called economy of scale. And this contract is an opportunity or an effort for us to capitalize on that. So during the course of this past year, we found it necessary to contract with the Bud Group for custodial services for positions that had been opened and were staying open and there were no candidates. And this was situations, and Seaforth is a good example. We started the year with basically seven contracted custodians from the Bud Group at Seaforth High School. And we went through the year with those 7. We were able to cut that number back, by the way, for next year to 5. So we've made some improvements, but we're nowhere near being able to staff the custodial staff at that school.
So excuse me, the additional students won't make,
No, sir.
okay.
There's a critical mass in that when we compute that. A lot of it has to do with the square footage.
Yeah.
And fortunately, when we built Seaforth, we paid a lot of attention to the materials that we put in. So that'll help us. But when we were looking at this, we're already at a point. We ended the year with temporary custodians at 4 schools, and it's hard to find organizations that are even willing to do this. Typically, when you get into contracting for custodians, they want to do it all. They want to do the whole school. They want to do the whole district. They want to do the whole. And this is a step that gives us time to assess if that's where we are with this or not. At this point, we're not. And there's a couple reasons that go into that, not the least of which is custodians are dual role employees, and we need them driving buses as well. So the positions that we're putting them in are positions that we just don't have any leads for. Now, what we've done is we've taken care of, we assessed what we had last year. We've had a couple other schools that came up on the western side that we needed to take care of some issues there. We have the new central services building opening up, and we're going to need to add another custodian there because we basically tripled our square footage. So we're going to have a second custodian there. When we get to the end of that and we looked at the other open positions that we have across the district, this is for a not to exceed amount of 25 custodians with 2 supervisors to keep them on track and to keep those positions filled for us, because they have turnover just like we do. But that's not our problem, that's their problem. And to take care of the paperwork and of dealing with this and those pieces. But even with that, at the end of the day, and I put a dollar amount in here in the opening for the custodians, but just the custodian side of it, this is actually a fairly substantial savings for us, or can be. Now, the contract is a not to exceed, and we only pay for what we use. I was reminded, I was thinking this through of the Liberty Mutual commercial. You only pay for what you need. Very similar concept. I'm obviously a victim of the media, but anyway. But the premise is that we may not need all 25 of these, but we have them there if we do. And if we do use them, then that really large number that you see there is the not to exceed dollar amount, which is, if you scroll down just a little bit more there it is. A little bit over $1 million. It's not quite 1.1. But that's what it would cost us if we used all 25 of them starting immediately. And we're not going to. So again, we have a cushion here, but that's based on our experiences from this past year and the situations that we ended up in. And this will prevent us from having to come back to you several times during the year with additional needs. It also locks us in on a price. And because of the economy of scale approach, this price per custodian is actually less than we paid last year by bits and piecing it.
I see the date, June 30th. What happens to those schools during the summer?
Well, this past year, we did a summer contract because, for instance, Seaforth is a good example. We don't need 7 custodians at Seaforth during the summer. And our normal allocations are set up that way. You have a 10-month allocation that's based on having the kids in the building. And then you have a 2-month allocation that's substantially less because mostly you're taking care of floors. Even with our summer school approach, because with our summer school hours that we do, we actually allocate custodian hours in there. So that's taken care of. So it gives us an opportunity to regroup.
I got you. Okay. Question. Yes.
It's also important to, and I was waiting to see if Mr. Blythe would share this, but the savings that we're talking about right now is approximately $13,000 per custodian that we contract out. So you can kind of see where the savings, why this becomes benefit positive for the district, and it also helps us solve the problem of workforce, which is, as you can see, extremely challenging. But approximately 13,000. Yes, sir.
He was nodding one.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, if Tony nods, I'm good. That's right. Thank you, sir.
The minimum salary and how the pay scale changed this year.
Any other questions, Mr. Norris?
I move that the Chatham County Schools Board of Education approve the 1-year, the BUD contract, the BUD group contract as presented.
Got a motion, a second, any discussion? All in favor with an eye?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
George, moves
Yes.
to work in middle school, Dr. Jackson.
Yes, Mr. Chair, last month we had a group, the Chatham Remembrance Coalition, the Community Remembrance Coalition Chatham, bring forward a proposal to consider a artist in residence program that would culminate with a mural of local African-American trailblazers from the Pittsburgh area that would be installed here on this campus. At that time, we asked them to present that in a formal proposal to you. They have done so. Additional requests were for the actual names of the individuals who were being recognized in that mural. They have provided that information. And so tonight we're asking that we be given the authority to go ahead and move forward with developing an MOU for the Artist in Residence program, where they're going to bring in an artist who will work with our students, who will develop the art and to install it here, to develop an MOU for that project with the I want to make sure I get the name right with the Community Remembrance Coalition Chatham for this school year. We would work with our attorneys to make sure that all liabilities and things concerns are addressed appropriately.
And did I read or dream that originally it was going to go on the school, but they've decided to go with, put it on panels? And which I thought when I read that, I thought, I didn't think I dreamed that.
Yeah.
And I thought that's great
Yes.
because, you know, you can't say that building's going to be there.
Right.
And so, you know, if for some reason it is not going to be there, then we keep it and move
Correct.
it,
Yes.
which I think is great. And instead of actually, I mean, if something happens to this building, that mural back there, unfortunately,
Mhm.
is gone.
Wow.
And so,
It is, I'm not sure if they're panels that'll be connected or put together, but
right.
it will be a panel that's attached. Correct. Yes,
I
sir.
think that's good.
Thank you, sir.
I move that the Chatham County Board of Education approve a partnership with Community Remembrance Coalition Chatham, CRC-C, and authorize development of a memorandum of understanding MOU to manage the project as presented.
Got a motion, a second, any discussion? All in favor, with aye?
Aye.
Thank you all for being here. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Got a motion, a second, all in favor, with an aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank y'all.
Oh, you coming?